Welcome to the 3PL Insider podcast by Growe. Boy, do we have a treat for you today. One of the most legendary faces in the 3PL space to ever do it, in my opinion. Mr. Vincent Gulisano flew all the way in from Scottsdale, Arizona, and we are so pumped to have you on the podcast today, man.
You are too kind with your words. I appreciate it. And
Cheers.
It's a pleasure to be here. Salute.
I have to say, one, that's strong.
I was just going to say, that was stronger than I remember it being.
Blanton's, love it though.
Ooh.
I would not be where I am today in my career without Vin Gulisano taking a shot on me, which I'm forever grateful for. You know, Growe literally exists. This podcast exists. This business exists because Vin took a shot on me. I can't thank you enough for this is back in the Amware days.
Yep.
Why don't we start with you just giving us a little bit of a rundown of where are you from? Where'd you grow up? How in the world did you land in the logistics space?
Okay. I grew up in Connecticut, went to a small college called Providence College in Rhode Island, and got out of college and wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do, but there was a company that was recruiting at Providence called United States Liens. Don't exist anymore. But it's like American President's Lines, Sealand carrier. So they were recruiting at the school. Some of my friends went there. So I went, got a job with them for a year. Didn't really like carrier. And then from there, I moved to a company in Connecticut called Osco Logistics. And Osco is where, you were talking to me earlier about, some of the things that I know and where I got my foundation of what I know was there. Because it was a smaller 3PL at the time, but it was owned by Uniroyal Corporation. So Uniroyal had tires and Naugahyde and chemicals, all these products, and they were the internal warehousing company that became a 3PL, which many do. And all of that sort of big company, how do we look at our cost? How do we look at our marketing? How do we do financial controls and operating controls? I learned there. And a lot of the people that I grew up with there are now leading other companies in the 3PL space, CEOs, CFOs, whatever, kind of leveraging that knowledge that we had. So I got it there, worked there for a good part of my career, and then moved to Silicon Valley for the .com startups.
Oh, man.
And we actually ended up raising a good amount of money, venture capital money. And it was kind of a 1999 shit bob. Not kind of, exactly.
So before its time.
It was exactly. So, we ended up selling it, not very, not at a great, I say exit, but it was at the .com was bursting, the whole bubble was bursting, but we actually sold it. And I learned just so much about small companies, startups, private equity, venture capital, what they do, the good things that they can do and the bad things they can do to operators. And then from there, I did a lot of international travel with APL Logistics, Eagle, which is now Seva, before moving on to a small company that I went in with a partner called Parcel Port.
I want to back up a little bit because what I also need to do is, so Vin has the craziest track record in the 3PL fulfillment space of just how he came up in the industry, from Parcel Port all the way to selling Parcel Port because you landed a monster customer. It's growing like crazy. Then you sell to Amware, and then you stay on at Amware. They sell to private equity, and now you're a consultant with B2C 3PL.
That's the rest of the story, exactly.
And the B2C 3PL is incredible for us because you've been able to help so many of our clients. But I'm just trying to lay the foundation of like, this is who Vin Gulisano is, what he's done. So start back with Parcel Port. So this is one of the coolest stories. This is kind of where, right before our relationship started, all of those things transpired. But let's go to walk me through how you started Parcel Port, and then what led you to selling to Amware?
Sure. I kind of an interesting part of the Parcel Port story is I ended up in Phoenix, Arizona, with another company that I left off called Great Wide, another private equity-backed company that was actually headquartered here in Dallas at Park Central.
So I'll stop you at Great Wide. I your connections from Great Wide. I can't tell you how many times in this industry that I have brought up your name and people say, "Oh, I worked with him at Great Wide,"
Yeah.
or "I know him from Great Wide days." Like, I guess all of you guys came from Great Wide. I mean, and you all know each other, so you're just like the most famous guy in the world from your Great Wide days, and then you go to Parcel Port. Okay,
So Great Wide brings me to Phoenix, and what was interesting was, they were struggling. The warehouse business was actually doing well, but they had dedicated transportation and brokerage, and the transportation business was struggling a little bit. So I decided to leave. But why I decided to leave was I was actually seeing a friend from high school's Facebook page, and I see a cactus in the back, and I call him. I'm like, "Hey, Ken, are you in Scottsdale? Are you in Arizona?" He said, "Yeah, I am. I moved here a few months ago, and I own a 3PL called Parcel Port." And that's how I was like, "Well, gee, I run 3PLs." And so Ken and I got together. I became a partner. We got very lucky very quickly with a few big accounts and one very monster one that you referred to a minute ago. And that's sort of how I got Parcel was the smallest thing I'd ever been at, like $4.5 million of sales. And we quickly went to 12-ish and 13. And then we decided it was time to sell. Amware basically acquired us, and we were Amware. Amware had a couple of B2B, like big bulky warehouse buildings, but all the growth then came with Amware. Then we sold to private
so
equity.
was Amware owned by private equity at that point?
No, it was
So they were
too
just trying to get into the D2C space.
interesting. I sold it to, when I sold it, I kept some of my equity, so I was still a partner with them, but one of the 2 partners was from Osco. My early days, a guy named Jim Smith, who is still a friend of mine today. Jim owns Symbia now, as you know.
Oh, yeah, the
So
man, the
we're
myth,
we're a
the legend,
small
Jim
we're a
Smith.
small incestuous little world we are.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so, that Jim and I knew each other. There were some dynamics in the business at Amware that were similar to Great Wide at the time as well. So I had some background that fit with Amware because they ran some pallet repair facilities, which I also did at Great Wide. So, it was a good fit. So Jim and I got together, and then, after a couple of years, we decided, let's try and bring in some private equity and that whole story.
So let's go to Parcel Port. So you become a partner. So what is life like at Parcel Port when they're 4.5 million in sales? You come in and you really start ramping things up, and you're bringing a lot of knowledge from what you've done in the past. You're coming in, obviously you're a people person, so you're getting out there. You're probably leading sales or some. I mean, I'm assuming that you're out really chasing new
Might be
business.
CEO, but I'm really chief sales officer no
Yeah,
matter where
yeah,
I go.
your sales off the charts. So you build Parcel Port. What are some things that happened at Parcel Port that were just monumental, right? Like, just give me some stories back from those days when y'all are scrapping, you're building, because a lot of the guys that we work with are in that phase. And so they're thinking, "Man, how do I," like, your story and your trajectory is exactly what these guys wanna do, right? So, and it's what we wanna help them do at Grow. So, how do we help these guys? Like, what are some things that happened at Parcel Port, like things you put into place, things you learned through those years that helped you get to the exit?
Well, I hadn't thought about it until now, but as you bring up Parcel Port, I think the formulaic approach that I bring with what I'm doing today with my B2C 3PL advisors
Right.
is sort of what I learned there, which is, okay, here's a small company, good people, solid ownership, good workers, but they're missing just a few pieces of the puzzle, like how to control things, how to measure things, how to have some more standardized processes, how to get people feet, all those little things, how to sell a little bit more professionally than maybe we even are as a company, just so people can trust that we know what we're doing. That's what I did there. And,
And
you
how
know,
old were you at that point?
I was a young buck. It was 2010, so I was probably 50.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So Parcel Port, you're bringing in all these new processes. You guys are kind of dialing things in. Now, what helped you land that big monster customer? Can you share who it is? Who it
sure, there's
was?
a company called It Works, which is a multi-level marketing company out of Florida, and they're still,
They're still
I
going.
think they're still a company of Amware's today,
Yeah.
a customer of Amware's today.
Well, there was another company, the sock company, right?
Oh, that was also, yeah, that was Bombas Socks.
Yeah, I
Correct.
have a ton of Bombas socks, which I'm sure everybody does.
Everybody does.
But Bombas was just getting started, right?
Yeah,
So how do you
but Bombas happened sort of into Amware as we
Okay.
It sort of happened, bled over, I think, from Parcel Port into Amware,
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
from the sale. So it works with pure Parcel Port. And listen, sometimes I think you're like, it was a lucky thing. We put a good bid together, but also, you make your own luck and you do things right. So sometimes I wondered, like, is it just a lot of luck at times?
Yeah.
But it was an account that was bigger than we should have won for where we were. And that's sort of what drove some of the desire to be acquired by Amware, to give us some of the wherewithal and capital and expertise in a bigger environment to handle a client that could be 5 times bigger than the whole company was. And that was kinda, I don't know if anyone at Itwork is listening, you weren't supposed to know that. But, how do we how do we deal with this? We're gonna need to have a lot of capital, working capital.
Dude, this is the story of every mid-market 3PL that's trying to grow and scale. I mean, they're out pitching new business day in and day out, and I can't tell you how many conversations I have with 3PLs where they're like, "Man, I got a whale on the line, and I'm gonna figure out how to make it happen." But it's awesome to hear that you were able to land that and then go execute, and you did what you needed to do to go deliver, and you served them well. So,
And listen, and the whale turned from an orca to a blue whale
yeah.
also, which is, Itworks was on a massive growth path.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact numbers, but they were probably doing something like, 50,000 orders a month,
Oh,
which
what?
is how we generate our revenue. I know our peak was 1.2 million orders a month, which most
Wow.
3PLs I talk to today, that's 10 times larger than all their business,
Yeah,
you know.
that's off the
Yeah.
charts.
So, but again, that didn't happen overnight, but it happened over a year and a half.
Yeah,
So we ended
which
up
is still
having to
crazy
expand
fast.
locations because we didn't want to do it all in one location. It would
Right,
save on freight by moving to different
right.
geographies.
Yeah, spread
Yeah.
it out. So, what do you think if we're thinking back to the conversations that you're having with, say, It Works, and you're in the boardroom, you're pitching them, what are you? Because a lot of the guys that are gonna listen to this are in that position. They're trying to get in those boardrooms, and they wanna win really bad. So, what do you think? Did you guys have a competitive advantage with technology, or was it strictly pricing, culture, we're gonna deliver? Like,
I
walk me
think,
through the sales
yeah,
cycle of
yeah,
that.
I think it was, first of all, the pricing. Because of the type of complexion of Itworks account, there were a lot of similar SKU orders, which means that you could do things en masse. You can do things in bulk. And I remember actually with my partner when I suggested to him what I thought the rate should be, and it was like 1/3 of our normal rate. But I didn't just make up a rate. I sort of semi-engineered the rate based on the processes and
This
the
is batch
time.
picking?
Yeah, but it was badge picking to the nth degree, because at the time they had one SKU that was like 80% of those orders. So how could we do that en masse and make it so quick that we could do an order for 60, 70 cents versus $3 and make our margin?
That's every 3PL's dream
And
is
we
to
did.
get yeah.
Well, it was a dream. It was, but also a lot of 3PLs would, a lot of times, and this is where when I work with 3PLs in my advisory capacity, they sort of have this, it's $2 an order or 2.50 an order and 50 cents a pick.
Our rate card.
That's our rate card.
Here's our rate card.
And this is what it costs. Well, sometimes it could be that. Sometimes it could be $5 an order and $2 a pick. Sometimes it could be what It Works was, under a dollar an order, including the pick. And, we made our margin. We were successful making the margins that we wanted to at a rate that many others might have looked at quickly and thought, we're never going to do this." So I think we had the right rate, and it certainly wasn't a mistake. It was the right rate. And we positioned our approach and our process and our company professionally enough, even though we were small, to prove that we could do it for them to take a chance on us.
So do you think today, because I see this a lot today, like you just mentioned, here's our rate card. This is what it is, right? Um, did you engineer, like you by yourself are diving into the fundamentals of the operation, the pick times, the labor, the real estate costs, and you came to that number because you engineered that pricing yourself to be profitable. Whereas, a lot of times today, I think a lot of guys are relying on softwares to do this for them, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. I don't know, but I feel like your ability to engineer that yourself and make it profitable, even at those numbers, is
Yep.
is
Well, first of all, I'm impressed that you're even able to ask questions at that level of detail, which are very good, by the way. So good, kudos to you. But yeah, I mean, I think that, I'll go back to my Osco days, which is something that any of my old Osco friends are going to love that I'm bringing up because I learned that sort of discipline there. And so, let's just look at every step of the process. Let's add time value. Let's make sure our costs are properly engineered. I'm not just throwing a cost of, well, we pay people $20 an hour and that's my cost. No, how do we make sure our cost includes the supervisors and all the other people that are back there supporting the people picking? Because that's all part of our cost of goods sold. Get it all right, and then also make sure that you don't just make up a number because of a rate card, but you make up a number based on the process. So I'm not an engineer, and I don't claim to be. And when things get very complex, I bring in engineering friends who can help me. But when things are straightforward and just typical 80% of the time kind of business, we can sit down as operators and understand how things are going to work.
So from your USCO days, is the ability to understand and drill down to those numbers because maybe margins in the USCO type of business are a lot thinner, so you have to be perfect versus the B2C side, maybe there's a little bit more margin in there, you have a little bit more to work with, or is it
No, I think, not to disagree, but I think the real issue is that, you know what margin you want to make, you know what your return is, and you need to understand your cost of goods sold. So just do it right. Just do it professionally. Professionally is a strong word. Just do it right. Why make up a number, just because it's a rate card? And a lot of times people lose on that because of they don't realize it's more complex than they thought it was going to be.
so I see day in and day out, day in and day out. I mean, guys that are chasing business and they're as they're trying to especially talking to shippers and they go, "I have 5 quotes." And all 5 of these quotes are apples, oranges, and bananas. I mean, they're just so different. I gave them all the same data. I requested all the same things, and they all priced me out in these crazy ways. So there's a huge problem, I think, in that sector where a lot of these people that are trying to hire a 3PL, they're getting on Google and they're just meeting with 4 or 5 guys. 3PLs generally sometimes are notorious for, "I can do that. Yeah, yeah, I can do that," which is, you kinda gotta do that as you're building your business. But a lot of these brands go, "Man, I'm looking at my pricing from this guy, and it's literally 40% less than this one, but it's also not even near as detailed. So I'm a little nervous if I take this versus this because this guy put in the work to actually understand our." So there's a huge in the market. I think a lot of guys do it very different, but their pricing strategies sometimes are rate cards, sometimes they get in the weeds, but to the shipper they go. Sometimes they're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But you also at this point in your career, now that you're a B2C 3PL, a lot of brands come to you going, "Hey man, help me understand all this different pricing." So you're kind of drilling into the weeds with them, helping them navigate getting 5 different types of pricing from 5 different 3PLs as well, right?
Yeah, I'm never happier or prouder than when I work with a brand and I help them gather the data together that they need and the templates for response back so they get apples and not apples and oranges. But the data, and then when I send that out to 3PLs and they say, I never get data like this. I can actually price this, and maybe 1% is off and they have a few questions, but it's not like, we don't understand. We don't even know what we're doing here. What does it look like when an order is complete? How do we receive product? How does it get stored? You get data and you have to just make a bunch of assumptions. But if the data is good enough, they're not like baseless assumptions.
Or if the data is good enough and it's presented in a clean fashion that they can digest it in an easier way. Because sometimes the 3PL goes, they just dumped data on me that I mean, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to digest, but I'm pricing it based off of a lot of assumptions versus
Yes.
real hard data that really gives me.
Hard data turns into assumptions, and the assumptions that get made need to be the same across all the different respondents. So, if everyone comes up with a different interpretation of the data, then you're back to, yeah, you got data, but everyone interpreted it differently. So you really get all these different crazy responses. And then, some people are, if you don't give a template that says, look, here's the activity. I'm going to receive this many pieces. I'm going to ship this many pieces. I'm going to store this many pieces this way. then you get back, one 3PL comes back with cubic foot storage, another one comes back with pallet
Right.
storage, another comes back, and you're like, how am I gonna how am I gonna figure out how to
Very
compare these? So you come back and you say, look, this is the way we want you to respond. Now, we might end up getting into an agreement that changes a few of those things to something that you like, but for now, let's just do an apples to apples
Yeah.
response so we can look at this within minutes and say, okay, this is who looks really good and this is who might, and typically the brands don't like when someone's very high and when someone's very low. They don't
Right.
trust either one,
Right.
right? They want that sort of what's the grouping in the middle.
Right. Okay. So Parcel Port,
Mhm.
you land these accounts, you decide, okay, it's time for us to take a cash infusion or sell to somebody bigger so that we can service some of these bigger accounts. You know Jim Smith from the Usco days. Jim's a legend. Love Jim to death.
Another legend.
Another
He's more of
legend.
a legend than me.
Another guy that we should definitely have on. Um, and then
He's too ornery to be on something like
he
this.
is he definitely is. But he's probably up in Colorado
Sorry.
just living the dream. But okay, so walk me through the process of, did you evaluate other buyers besides Amware? Did you hire a broker? Did you like walk me through the process as you guys are working through the acquisition and how you were thinking through structuring it and what you did through that?
Yeah, sometimes life is opportunistic, and it was just a matter of timing. It was like we think we want, so we didn't go to a broker. We didn't put together big, books on the company and all that. We just, two guys that know each other, Jim and I. He has another partner. We meet with him as well. My partner Ken meets with them, and we just decide it's the right way to do. And the timing was right, and there were other nice little fits about it. Um,
So did you instantly plug into the Amware locations to have now a national footprint? Or did you have to go take
We had
more
to build
buildings
that
or
national footprint. So Amware was very much only Atlanta.
Atlanta? Yeah.
Yeah, and then when we started to grow, we opened Dallas, and then we opened, we had Connecticut, which was Amware, which is the Northeast location, Atlanta, then we opened Dallas, and then from there, other locations came as Amware continued to grow. Yeah, but
Okay,
they were all
so
part of the sort of Parcel Port e-commerce growth that was sort of driving those new locations to
right.
open.
So walk me through life after acquisition. So now you're Amware, and what's your role at Amware after the acquisition?
President.
So you're president of Amware now. You went from Parcel Port, president of Amware. Walk me through life after that. How do you scale Amware from a B2B 3PL, doing a lot of CHEP locations, doing a lot of B2B stuff? Now they have an e-commerce side. They've got a guy like Vin Gulisano who's got all this expertise in B2C fulfillment, and now you're gonna come in and turn Amware, which is, they've since sold, but, like, they became a juggernaut in the fulfillment space led by Vin. So walk me through how you go from selling Parcel Port, taking over as president, and then scaling to that degree.
And they, listen, they didn't necessarily like having Vin showing up either at their front door as I think back on it. But, listen, I was president, but there were two owners that really were also the main drivers of the company. But I was certainly driving that e-commerce growth. That's what, the whole partnership was designed to bring. So it was very similar. There were a lot of great people at Amware, but they were B2B kind of focused people. And I always tell people it's like, if you're in B2B and you're a professional B2B operator, you speak the language of fulfillment. You just don't speak the dialect. And I can teach you the dialect. It's just, I get into a meeting and I can just tell right away when I'm with the B2B 3PL, by the way, how many pallets do you have in the building? And like, in fulfillment, they don't even care if you have any pallets. It's how many orders am I picking? And so just those little nuances. So, we worked on that. The team, we built that out a little bit more as well. But the original team, there were some great people that really were able to make that conversion, learn the dialect, and that was the sort of the basis for the growth to continue and be successful.
Yeah, I think I mean, we talk to 3PLs every day, right? And so there's a lot of B2B guys that just have this, like, wall up against fulfillment. Like, I'm not doing that. I never wanna do that. I'm not touching that. That's fine. Um, and then there's a lot of guys that are only e-com, and then now there's a lot of guys that are starting to try to do both. So the guys that are doing both, that maybe started as B2B and are really working their way into B2C, I think one of the lessons that I've seen a lot of them learn the hard way is labor. And they just totally took on way too much labor to make everything happen. They threw labor at it, and then they realized later, we lost money. We spent way too much money on labor. So we have to really dial in the operation, and they've learned lessons the hard way doing that. But I guess, was that a big learning curve for a lot of the Amware guys, trying to learn how to really allocate labor and make sure that their processes were as efficient as possible, going from just slinging pallets everywhere to like really like how you line up all of the different SKUs and how you're orchestrating somebody's path to go make those picks and get back to the pack stations. I mean, all of those things it takes a long time to learn all those things, right?
Yeah, and you know, the at the Amware level, I think, you know, we brought in some of the Parcel Port business. They could quickly come out and see how things were done and adapt pretty quickly. I actually literally just started up, advising a new 3PL like 2 weeks ago, and B2B. And it's exactly what you said. They're trying, they're like, whenever we price a deal, we're coming up with like $15 an order, and we're never winning any deals. And I'm like, that's because they're usually about $2.50 an order.
Yeah.
So what are we doing wrong, right? So is it the system? Do we have the appropriate systems to batch things, or just set up pick paths the right way?
System meaning your WMS.
WMS,
Can your
warehouse
WMS
warehouse
handle
management system.
can
Yeah.
your warehouse management system handle B2B and B2C, which is actually kind of hard to find. One that
Yeah,
can do both really
yeah.
well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do another podcast on the warehouse management
Yeah,
systems,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's just there's so much there. There's nothing that's perfect. You can spend tons of money or a little bit of money and get the same thing accomplished sometimes, I feel. But, the systems help without a doubt.
Interesting. So a lot of guys that are listening to this are in the middle of, hey, I've been 80% B2B. I'm 20% B2C now, and I really want to scale my B2C to 50, 60% of my business. Are there any specific steps, like first steps that you're like, man, if you're trying to convert or mold yourself into being able to be an omnichannel warehousing fulfillment operation, and you really want to scale up your B2C business, what are some of the first steps that you would take if that was you today?
Um, Well, they need to make sure their WMS can operate in that environment. So a lot of the times when I'm with a pure B2B, they might have a system that sort of they sort of built from the ground up,
Yeah,
and it does
it's a
that.
glorified Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, or, green screens or what,
yeah.
and even not, sometimes they're just using a system the wrong way. They just gotta make sure they have the right system that can do the types of things that we just talked about. And then after that, it's just understanding the operation and it's a little bit more production oriented in the fulfillment business. It's like, in the B2B, you can send people out, they know they're doing receiving all day, or they know they're doing pallet picking all day. In fulfillment, it's like, well, we're gonna start out picking orders all morning, but then we're gonna shift some of the people into packing, and then we're gonna get some of the other people to, do some of the value add, whatever. But that shift is sort of occurring intraday. And that level of it's again not crazy hard, but it's different,
But
right?
is it a factor also because a lot of B2B operators use temp agencies? So if I'm using a temp agency and I want somebody to be nimble and be able to go pick, pack, and do these different things, odds of you being successful with somebody who just showed up today as a temp agent or from a temp agency, you're limited in what you can actually, how diverse that their workload can be for the day. So would you say one of the first steps is potentially hiring people directly once you have a good, like what do you think the labor situation looks like? Because you can't just lean on temp agencies and have them be
No,
flexible,
no,
so you
you
need to
can't,
hire
you
people
can't.
directly.
And the systems, a lot of them are getting better so that, we just started using a new system recently at one of a facility up in Sacramento that I have, and, we can't actually get a person within a day because, it's almost bulletproof with a scanner, right? You're going to a location, it's telling you where the location is, you're getting the item, you're scanning it. If it's wrong, it's gonna stop you. And then if you go to put it in the right bin location in the cart, it's gonna stop you, 'cause you gotta put it in the right bin location. But it's not like something where they can come in that morning and be going that morning, but it may only be a day. But so typically the way 3PLs are leveraging temp labor is, we're gonna use our core people to do the most important things. And then we'll bring in temp labor to make boxes, to add stickers, to, move things around. And then when we see who the better people are in that group of temps, then we start cross-training them and try to have them show up more often. But we need that temp labor more than anything just for volume shifts, right? We just, we can't, build the church for Easter Sunday and have 60 people in the building all the time because we may need 60 people one day a week.
Right.
So we got to figure out how to leverage and move that work around.
Got it. Okay, so let's back up a little bit back to your story. So you come into Amware, now you're scaling B2C and B2B. And fast forward, how many years were you the president before you guys sold to private equity? Or took on private equity capital, I should say.
2 years.
Okay, so what happened in those 2 years? Like, what was the level of growth that you're like, look, we came in, and then Jim saying, it's time, right? And then you guys go, obviously, then the next process is, I can't wait to talk about, like, how you guys are getting out into the market and go into that front. But those 2 years, let's talk about those 2
Yeah,
years.
the numbers exactly escape me, but it was, right at this moment because you gave me this alcohol. But it was, 100% growth, type of deal, type of deal. We knew it was, so that was, that was the type of growth. And then, what was the beginning part of the question again? It was,
What was the WMS system that y'all were operating, and was that able to, or did you stick with the same one through those 2 years?
we did for those. Yeah, it was a small WMS called Core E, which I don't think anyone even knows what it is, but it was a Parcel Port system. And then Amware was using Cadre.
Never heard of either one of those.
Yeah, Cadre's, still out there. They're I still see people using it all the time. I don't know that it would be considered the big fulfillment system, but they were using Cadre for their e-commerce. And I shouldn't say, I've seen a few e-commerce related 3PLs that are using it in the past year. So it's out there.
So you were running 2 systems side by side during
B2B on the older system, and then Corey on the e-commerce.
Okay, so for those 2 years after acquisition, just walk me through what life was like. Like, you're obviously, they buy you, and they're like, "Look, you're the president. Your job is to take us from here to here." So what are some of the things that you implemented through that process? And then as you got into the next phase, like, let's just start with those 2 years. Like, walk me through that.
Um, well, we continued. We took the investment. Obviously, we've got private equity investors, and we're using that investment money to build out the sales program, build out the marketing program, things that normally a lot of the individual owners don't like to spend money on marketing. It feels
Right,
like,
right.
BS to them.
I
So
I feel that. I feel that. I feel that.
yeah, just what you're doing right now.
Yeah,
They're like, why do we got to do that?
yeah,
So you try to explain to them, okay, we got to do some more marketing. We got to get some salespeople. We got to tighten up the sales processes. We need, just little things like financials. And, we got to I was talking today earlier at a meeting, and we got our flash financial process so that 2 weeks into the month, we could get a financial picture of how the month was going to end. It was like 95% accurate by the end of the month. Versus when we first started, we wouldn't even know how the month was until almost the end of the beginning of the next month. It took us a while to close. And then that gives you, it doesn't give you a chance to correct things like intra-month. So we were able to look and say, okay, well, what's going on? And sometimes there's nothing you could do. It's the complexion of orders are different and they're more complex, and we're not getting the easy orders this month, and, whatever it could be. But just to know and to be able to have a chance to adjust if it made sense. So it's the financials, the sales side, HR, just professionalizing things. But yeah, those 2 years or those years right afterwards were all around doing what private equity companies expect you to do. They expect you to take the individual owner property and turn it into something that has a little bit more corporatishness to it, I guess you'd
right.
say.
So whenever so I'm talking about, like, when before, so did Amware take on private equity money and then buy you?
No, Amware bought Parcel Port, the
And then
2
you were there
individual
for 2
sole
years,
proprietor owners. Then 2 years later, they sold,
then you took on.
and the owners stayed on the board,
Okay.
and I was on the board with them, and we had our monthly board meetings. But they, of course, lost control of the company because they'd sold more than half the
Right.
company.
But so let's dive into, what was the private equity company called that they
Rotunda Capital.
Rotunda Capital. I that name rings in my head. I
Yeah,
remember all these conversations 10 years ago, 8 years
that's
ago when
right.
we were talking about this. Okay, so Rotunda, how did Amware zone in on Rotunda Capital, did you guys meet with a few different private equity companies? Because there's a lot of guys that are listening to this that are in that phase going, "Man, I have bootstrapped this, and I've been busting my tail. It's time for a cash infusion. How do I evaluate all of the," because there's a lot of people that wanna do that, that are pursuing them, and they don't know who to talk to, who's legit, who's not. Just kinda talk about the process of evaluating the buyers or the private equity companies and how you landed on Rotunda Capital.
Sure. Well, I have this feeling that the 2 main owners of Amware are gonna remember this differently than I do. But the way I remember it was, we didn't bring in a banker, and that's 100% true. Um, we built a book together that I led the process of building our own, book on the company. And then, I reached out to 4 or 5 different, private equity groups that I knew or had references from that, people told me I could trust. And, we put it out to 5 of them, and I think 2 or 3 of them put offers in. So, was it lucky again? Maybe a little lucky.
So as you're evaluating those offers though, how did you narrow down from like, okay, Rotunda Capital, like which one's gonna give us the most obviously the acquisition price or the valuation is very important, but also like who's gonna be that strategic partner that we wanna partner with to take us to that next level?
It's price.
It's always price. Okay, price is
I gotta
price.
tell you, yeah, I mean, listen, unless it's very, very close,
Yeah.
it's price. I mean, everyone tells you the strategic, and I'm sorry. I've been
Uh-huh.
through so many of these,
Yeah.
and the high price bidders won every one of them. So the high price bidder just always happens to have the strategic insights that we need to partner with. So
So that's
so
probably also why they're willing to pay that much because they go, "This is how much we know we can do with
that's the
this."
way of looking at it too, which is we get the value of it. Because listen, every owner of every company always thinks their company is worth more than maybe it is, right? And that's part of my job when I work with these 3PLs is don't, everyone thinks their house is worth more than Zillow says it is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's the same thing. So everyone wants to get this crazy amount of money, and then what's realistic, and so that the highest price usually is closer to what they believe their company's worth. And by the way, I'm sure there are many out there that are not that way, but I
Yeah.
just everyone I've been involved with, it feels like.
So a lot of my clients are in this window where they're going, "Man, I've bootstrapped this. I've got it all the way to this point. Do I sell completely and just go buy a beach house? Or do I sell to a larger player and then roll up into the bigger wheel, the bigger operation? Or do I try to go find a strategic investor that's gonna basically be a cash injection, take some chips off the table, and then be the tip of the spear to go roll up other fulfillment companies to build one juggernaut and then turn around and sell it?" So, I'm sure you've seen people in every single one of those. Um, from the Amware perspective, you guys took on a cat you sold, or I guess they sold more than 50%?
Yes.
Okay, so they were taking a back seat. Now Rotunda Capital's got control. You're still president, or you moved to CEO at this point. So now you're CEO of Amware, great company, and you're reporting to a board, a private equity board, regularly. Walk us through what that experience was like. Just reporting to a board and just life after.
Well, having been at a few other larger companies, it wasn't as much of a culture shock to me to be at a board meeting where you're, no hijinks going on, no silliness trying to be professional, putting a board book together. And so that wasn't so foreign to me. But a lot of the uh, companies that I work with, the owners they've never worked at a company that had to do that. So it becomes a little bit more foreign to them. So that's why I work with a lot of them on that. Like, how do we, it's not like anyone's smarter than you are. It's just a matter of how we can put it together so that it's an informal. So typically the private equity guys are going to ask for a little bit more formal of a board meeting, if you will. And they also want, more um analysis into the bigger decisions that are being made.
They're
Like,
leveraging data. They want you to show them data,
right.
and they wanna be able to make decisions based on historical numbers and projections.
Correct. And they're putting leverage on the company that a lot of times wasn't there before. So now you've got debt. So you can't make decisions that could bring you out of covenants or, cause you issues with with the debt that you now have on the company. So
Right.
that's what private equity is about. They're putting leverage on almost all the time.
So as the former owner, like if I'm a 3PL owner, I sold to private equity or the majority of private equity, I need to be thinking about, I'm no longer able to just make decisions on a whim like I used to. I have to go run them by the board. I have to go pull together and I have to be able to present the data to back up the decision that I want to make. So obviously that's a heavy load for somebody who has not ever had to do that because you've been doing it yourself. So if I'm looking at considering this, it's definitely something that I want to think about before I sell my company because then I sign up to go have to do that regularly if I'm going to stay on and remain CEO.
Mhm.
So you did that for how many years where you remained the CEO after Rotunda Capital came in?
I think it's 4 or 5.
So 4 or 5 years, you guys built and built and built, and then you left and you started B2C 3PL Advisors.
Mhm.
Okay. So tell us about life at B2C 3PL Advisors. What do you do and where do you add value?
Like any good business model, it's morphed and like things have popped up that I never realized would be part of the plan. But the initial idea was, okay, I've learned how to do this stuff. I've done it a few times myself. I've sort of had that corporate background from Uniroyal way back when, Osco. How can I apply this to some of the owners of companies that would like to learn some of this? Just putting some of these tools into place. So the notion initially was, let me just go do this advisory role. And so, it's not a board member, but it's like it's almost like a working advisor. I don't, there's nothing I hated more than when I was at a 3PL than when someone showed up and said, we have a consultant here. I'm like, oh my God. That's why I kept consulting out of the title. Because I think of myself as a working person. I'm not going to put some strategic book together. I'm going to help you with a pricing model and maybe price a specific customer or, put together a new way of tracking our KPIs or SLAs for clients, whatever, or operational, process flow. So very sort of meat and potato stuff. But then also backing up and saying, okay, how do we price professionally? How do we put professional presentations together? How do we analyze our financials in a way that we have some key metrics that we're following, maybe labor as a percentage of handling revenue. And, how do we hold our operators accountable to keeping their labor down and all those little things. And so that's sort of what I was thinking. And then it sort of morphed a little bit. Brands, because of my network, people like you will call me and say, Vin, there's a brand that needs help. They want to find a 3PL. So it started to morph, which, because a lot of these brands will go Google warehousing in Indiana,
Right.
and then they'll call a tire warehouse for their apparel,
Yeah.
and they're like, yeah, we're talking to them. They seem really good. I'm like,
Yeah.
no. So, I know enough about the industry and having been around a long time. I sometimes can come to them and say, this is the right company. And by the way, they're really operating really well in LA and New Jersey, but don't go in their Chicago warehouse right now.
Yeah.
They're having issues. So to have that kind of level of detail that they wouldn't get from a Google search has been really cool. So then I work with the brand on trying to match them up with the right 3PL. And that's been a really interesting twist. And then, of course, from there, it just sort of expanded to acquisitions and, should I bring in private equity? Can you help me sell? Can you help me find a company to buy? All those little things are just natural outcomes, I think.
So it's safe to say Swiss Army knife.
Hmm. Sure.
Beautiful. So yeah, I think a lot of when you go back to when you said nothing drove you more crazy than we've got a consultant coming in.
Yeah.
Um, the funny thing is a lot of these consultants have never really lived it. They just got an MBA and they think they can tell you what to do. Not saying all of them is wrong. Some of them are really good. But if I'm a 3PL and I'm going to bring somebody in, I want a veteran. I want a guy who's been in the trenches, built something, sold it, won big customers, lost big customers, and made mistakes and also, hit some home runs. Like I want that guy to come in and help me dial in what I'm doing, which is why I think, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast too, so we could dive into all this stuff. But, um, if for the folks out there listening and they're thinking, man, what's the next step? What's the next step in my career, in my 3PL's business? Um, I can't recommend talking to Vin enough. I mean, I think I introduce you to everybody that I've ever met just because obviously for our business, if they're growing, we're growing. And I know that when I bring Vin to the table, they're going to dial things in, and they're going to become more profitable, and they're going to get to grow and scale their business, which ultimately drives in growth for Growe. So it's a big factor for us. Um, and I I think it's incredible what you've been able to build over the years. And so you're B2C 3PL. So you're helping brands, you're helping 3PLs come in and helping them dial in operations. You also have another side venture, G&B Fulfillment. Great fulfillment company in Sacramento, by the way.
Thank you.
Why don't you walk us through how that came about and what you're doing at G&B?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, obviously, I was walking away from running a big 3PL to become an advisor. And, almost immediately, like within 4 months of me doing that, a client that I used to run their large dedicated warehouse for, a company called Grant& and Bowman Toy Company. When I first got to Great Wide I was the president of Great Wide, my first week there, I got a call that there was a fanatic customer that was very upset. Their warehouse was being run in LA, and he was unhappy with the way Great Wide was doing it, and I want to talk to the president. So I got on the phone with him, put together a team, we fixed it, and then we became fast friends forever after that. So when I left, he called me and said, "Jim, Vin, why don't we just form our own 3PL, take this business, and you can run our business for me, and maybe, we'll, as I try and consolidate my inventory down in this 300,000 square foot building, we can bring in other customers." So we
This
did.
is the building in the Redlands, right?
It was in Redlands to start, correct. And then, of course, our timing for when that lease came due, this is how Growe gets involved. Um, the timing of how our lease came due was coming right out of COVID. So it was like no buildings available in LA, no one's cutting deals, free rent, forget. I mean, everything, it was the worst ever. And the rents that they were trying to get were our rent increase was a 300% rent increase in a 300,000 square foot
It
building.
was a
It's like
wild
a
time.
400,000. I was like, just crazy. So, we called Grow and said to Summit, help us analyze this. Where should we move? We can't be in LA. So we looked at Phoenix, we looked at Vegas, we might have looked at Reno a little bit, but we ended up in Northern California, and I still think we got the best deal via Grow, by the way, of anyone in Northern California,
I can confirm you did get the best deal in Northern California.
like in the last 5 years. Sorry to our landlord for doing that, but I just, we were in this, Class A-ish kind of building. I think you'd call it a Class A. It's
Yeah,
close. It's a
absolutely.
Class A building, 32-foot clear, but, good rent. The landlord's happy. Yeah, did I want a brand new building? I think when you first started bringing me, I was like, "God, I want those brand new buildings." And, you're like, "Why?" "Why did this thing will work?" And we got the TIs in there. We fixed the place up, and it's just beautiful. And like right now, and all anyone comments on is how nice that warehouse is when they come in. So it's that skill set. So look, when you said I gave you your first chance at Amware, I mean, you only got it because you were, dependable and your advice was good, and it continued all the way through to this building.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, that was a wild one because you
Yes.
guys were looking in you built a building in
My partner did,
your
correct.
partner built a building just over the
In
mountains in
Victorville.
Victorville, and then ended up he
Well,
sold it or
no,
somebody came in and said, "Actually, I want that more than you do."
I want that more than you do, and I'll give you a 10-year lease on it
Yeah.
for a Class A tenant. So
Home run.
done.
Home run for him.
Yeah, and the building hadn't even been completed yet, so you
Right.
gotta, it's like, coupon clipping at that point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Gotta do it.
So then we had
So
to pivot,
so then
and
we
it
had no
was
building.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, that was great.
it was fun.
And honestly, looking at the market in Northern California, the way that sets up.
I was a little nervous about Northern California, I'll admit, and, I guess what I should know now, what I've learned now and I should have learned earlier was that there's always clients, for any region of the country, you just gotta find them. I was like, "Are there enough?" And what we're finding is there are enough. Because some of these, like, I don't know if you consider Northern California a secondary market, but it feels like compared to LA, it might be. But from an e-commerce perspective, you can still deliver to the rest of the country just as easily. You can still get product in over the Port of Oakland and stay away from the Port of LA. It worked out really well.
Beautiful. So, if we're gonna rapid fire just some, like, some Vinnie G lessons learned over the years. If you were gonna take a fulfillment center from one location that's doing, call it 14, 15 million in revenue, your one location, call it Dallas. You really wanna go you really wanna expand across the country, and you're trying to take it to that next level. Um, what are some of the first steps that you would think about in how you're gonna grow and scale into multiple markets? Because opening your second warehouse in another market is daunting to a lot of guys. But if you're thinking about what obviously the first step is called grow, go get a breakdown of the market, right? And then once you lock in a building, like, what are those first steps that you're thinking through as you're gonna go open your second warehouse in a new market?
I tell everyone, it's almost, the order of magnitude of complexity goes up so much when you're not in the building every day.
Yeah.
You're not just showing up, waking up, going to your building, looking what's going on, what's the temperature of the people. So I think, and this may sound kind of basic, but I started out when I was 16 working at McDonald's. I'd throw the fries in the fryer later, and the button would go off, and you take it out. I put the burgers on the grill, and a little whistle, the whistle or bell would ring, and I'd flip the burger. You have to have a process that people can follow. So, I mean, while process sounds kind of lame, like everyone says it, if you don't have your way of doing things that you can then export to your new location, and of course, have the people that can execute and that you trust, which is almost maybe even more important. Because, but those two things, you're going to have a hard time if they just sort of make it up as they go in the new location. This is how we receive, or this is how we keep our paperwork. You're gonna have heartache. So, a lot of the times when I get involved with customers today, it's like, "How do we standardize on this stuff now here? And then we'll be ready to take it and export it to the new location, and then make sure we hire the right people," which is probably the hardest thing in the world,
I
is
think
getting the right people.
yeah, I think that's the some of the biggest feedback that I get is the general manager is just pivotal, right? If you find the right guy, the right GM, then you can scale and build anything, right, for each location. But like, because those guys typically they know a lot of the labor around there. They know all the ins and outs, right? So the first step is obviously identify a building, and then the second biggest step is definitely find the right guy that's going to be your QB1 in your West Coast facility, for example. And then as you're building your systems in the building, are you do you go ahead right out of the gate? Are you putting all of the cash into the racking, the pack stations, the like you're gonna go ahead and make the investment? Because a lot of guys go, "Man, I'm gonna go open up out there, but I'm not gonna do any of that stuff yet. I'm really just gonna I'll just kind of spread it out on the floor and then kind of figure it out as I go." Is it would you say how important is it to just go ahead and put up the cash, set up the building, take the amount of space also that you're confident you're gonna sell into? Because I also see a lot of guys go take 20,000 square feet, and then by the time they got it set up, they're calling me going, "I need 50." But you signed a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease, so then now we're trying to scramble to figure out how to so
Kind of an individual decision on the CapEx or the cash, because if you have a lot and you can afford it, it makes sense to do a little. I don't like to overbuild it, because it's kinda like you build a Chevy and then you needed a Ford. You sort of put all racking in and you get all bulk accounts, or the first accounts you sign, or vice versa. So you wanna have a little something to show that you've got some capability, but you don't wanna overinvest in stuff that's gonna end up getting thrown out. I see that happen so often. Not thrown out, but, we will put a whole bunch of conveyor systems in that we ended up really not needing, or some pick to light or over robotics that we think are gonna be cool, but we don't really have a reason for having them in the build. So you don't wanna overdo that, but I think, you gotta have something so people have some confidence in you. And again, every situation is different. You may have a wonderful location somewhere else that you can use as your leverage point, and then it could be a little more concrete in the new location, but if you don't have anything to show, then you gotta make some kind of an investment. Yeah.
and then when you're thinking about assets as a 3PL scales their business, a lot of times, a buyer is looking at your contracts, but they're also like your assets actually mean a lot in an acquisition, right? Like if you don't own anything, you lease all your forklifts, you lease everything, and you don't, or let's say you have a lot of debt on all your racking, you don't own these assets. When you're thinking about the valuation of a company, how important is owning the asset versus not owning the asset?
That's a great question. I don't think it's that important to own the asset. Um, I gotta think about that for a second, but I think a lot of listen, your accounts receivable is an asset that gets valued in. your EBITDA and your client base and how strong your agreements are with your customers.
That's the
That's the
that's
biggest
the biggest
asset, you know,
factor.
so whether you own the racking or leased it or you own the forklift, I don't maybe from a private equity perspective, they might wanna see a few assets that they think are, if everything went south, they've got something to liquidate, but it's never gonna be close to what the value is of what they paid.
What you paid for it, right?
Yeah, so I don't know that would be that important. I can't imagine. I can imagine. Listen, some assets are certainly good, but, things like racking are just so hard to make them be worth money on when something goes south in a warehouse because they cost more money to take down and to move and to put back up again than they're worth, so
So do you encourage guys to, because I have some guys that are like, I pay cash for everything. I'm never financing anything. And then I have other guys who do like lease to owns on racking and material handling equipment, and some guys that just strictly lease their forklifts and then they finance their racking. I don't know that there's a right or wrong way to do it. I'm just curious, like, have you seen one way better than the other, or would you, if somebody's asking you the question, like, what would you? Obviously, their financial position is a huge factor. Which is a real unique. So working capital is everything for a 3PL, right? So we one of the things that we do a lot is we'll work with the landlords and figure out who's gonna. Some of these landlords will get real creative with you on material handling equipment, like maybe even fund it, right? They can build it into the lease. They'll pay for your racking and some of your material handling equipment, right? So that it's just amortized into your lease. But like the fact that you maybe it's maybe you can take the building as is, but you can use some of that TI dollars, and then you get, let's say you get 10 months of free rent on top of the landlord financing your equipment. Now you're focused on a GM. You're focused on the right people and the right processes set up, and then you obviously got to have an anchor or two, like some good accounts you're putting in there. Then you're off to the races. If you structure your real estate deal the right way, then you can use that to your advantage to help accelerate your growth into different markets.
yeah, and to your point, that's an example where I can't imagine why you wouldn't wanna do something like that to be if the landlord's gonna step up and help you with that. Anytime I can keep my capital for other things, why not? Yeah.
Again, why it's so important for you to have a real estate broker that understands your business. They understand working capital, they understand your operation, and they go to bat to go fight for those things because not every broker realizes how important that is. They look at going, look, man, I got you 3 months free on a 5-year lease.
Done.
This is market, is what it is. If your broker's telling you that, you got the wrong guy.
Agreed,
Agreed.
agreed.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those things where in the tenant rep world, you could there's so many tenants out there that it really doesn't matter to them because they're so big, and these guys do deals with them all the time. We dial in on the 3PL space, the fulfillment space, warehousing guys, because we know how important every little move is for their margin, for to allow them to expand. So when you dial it in, like we just did a deal in Reno, and we got them 18 months of free rent. It's a 10-year lease. We got them 18 months of free rent, but we get the landlord to contribute to material handling equipment. We dialed in so many different things, and we brought them a customer in the building. So the guy's going, all right. So you got me a customer, a main customer, like an anchor customer. The landlord's going to help fund some of this material handling equipment, and we have 18 months to sell into the balance of the building.
Listen, I
Pretty
don't
hard to
know I
beat.
don't I don't know if Growe and you created this kinda angle of this market, but you're the first one who I've ever seen do it. I see others saying that they're doing. I haven't ever seen anyone execute on it like you guys do. So again, kudos to really and then putting in the time to even if there's not a deal, putting in the time to throw deals, possible opportunities to a 3PL, even if there's no deal on the horizon,
Right.
smart, and that's I see a lot of people say that and obviously like any owner of a 3PL or in my industry, I get the calls, every week. And it's like,
It's funny because there's a lot of people that are trying to compete in that space, but the funny thing is they don't take the time to understand all the nuts and bolts of the operation. They take the time to go, look, I brought you a client, now give me a real estate deal. That's that's not really how it works, right? That does help, but, like, at the end of the day, when your broker really understands your P&L, they understand really all the moving parts that impact your top line and your bottom line, and how this real estate play and structuring it the right way can make you wildly profitable, kinda profitable, or not profitable, and they understand all of those moving parts. That's that's something you really you
Listen,
can't find out
yeah,
there.
the real estate decision is just one that it's such a long-term decision, and it's such a big expense that if you just have to put the right time into it with the right people behind you, or I mean, it's just you see so many people living with mistakes
Right.
for years, and it hurts
We
their
try to fix
business.
them all the time. Guys send
Yes,
us our lease and go, "What do I do in this situation?" Well, we dive in, we try to help, like, we're obviously gonna try to figure something out, but a lot of times guys go, "Man, you're locked in for 7 more
you
years,"
just
and
gotta wait.
yeah, that's tough. But so, as we wrap up here, um, what are some of the wildest things that you've seen in this industry? Like, whether it's a brand making wild decision or do something crazy or a 3PL do something crazy, like, what give us an example of just and you might have to think about it, but I'm just giving you, like, just something wild, the problem that you came in and you had to help somebody solve something wild.
Hmm, why can't I think of anything?
That's fine. Well, okay, so we can this
You cut it.
so
I was
yeah,
like, "What's" and I know I have about
the
20 of those
Tupperware
stories.
situation was kinda crazy.
Yeah.
Tupperware or I don't know, I'm thinking of, like I feel like, there's you've told me stories over the years that
I
I've and
know.
I'm trying to think of what those stories are so I can help you, but I know you've seen just some
This
wild
whiskey
stuff.
spinning around in my head
I
just
know,
right.
me too.
It's just right, though, in a good way.
Yeah.
Let me think about it for a second. So Tupperware's one.
Just something that people will be like, "Whoa, that is a
How
situation."
about what just happened with Top Drawer with their 3PL going out of business? Having it started up in 4 days.
Which one? What
I'll
happened?
tell you about
Tell me about it. All right, here
it.
we go.
All right. So, you know, I've got I feel like there's, like, dozens of stories, that I could tell you, but I can't think of any of them now that are from years ago. Those are some of the best ones from the years ago.
Oh, yeah.
But more very recently, I remember, working with, not re I remember, I was working with a brand, and I didn't come in first. I came in second, and they had picked another 3PL, and I was kinda hurt. Um, but, um, they went the way they went, and then, like, 2 or 3 months into it, this was April that they made a decision, of last year, and then, by September, I was like, "Can you help us with some value-added services? Can you help us with our B2B?" And we started helping them out, and, I was trying to get them to I started saying, "Do you guys like us? Do you wanna work with us? Yeah, you changing your mind?" And they weren't sure, and they were having a hard time making a decision because they had just moved into a new 3PL several months earlier, and, they, uh, they were having a hard time making that decision, and then I get a call in April. Our landlord, defaulted on their lease, and the landlord I mean, sorry, the 3PL defaulted on the lease, and the landlord is about to lock up the doors in the building. Can you help us? And we ended up basically sending our team out there the next day, and we started loading trucks to get their inventory out of the building. It was 6,000 SKUs, and I don't want to talk about who they were, but we ended so, I just remember saying to them, you know I can't do these rates that you're asking me to do. I'll go out of business.
Yeah. No,
And
that's
then the 3PL went out of business. So, it was just wild in that, it was fun. I love when there's a crazy challenge, and the challenge was we need to be shipping next week. So we've got no plan. I'm trying to get racking. I had the racks, but I had to get beams to add bins and get 6,000 SKUs set up. And we were up and we started shipping their first orders about a week later. So just 7 days. We had a ton of stuff. We basically were just pulling cardboard bins out of shelves and throwing them on pallets. It took us a month to go through thousands of bins to see what was in all of them. But we got the lion's share of the pallets moved, and we had the stock, and there were still some SKUs that were abandoned in these pallets that we had to get through. But we were able to ship most of the orders within a week, and then by about 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, we had 98% of the orders we were able to ship, and it was but I love the excitement of a problem like that
that is a
and
fire
and
drill.
getting our team to do it, and, And now we have like, super happy I mean, they love us because, our approach is, kind of the opposite of the last people. It was talk to us, communication, weekly meetings. If we make a mistake, we're gonna tell you. We're not gonna hide it. All those little things. And,
I think that's a prime example of something that every brand out there needs to understand. The cheapest guy is not always the best route, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to brands and they're evaluating different 3PLs and they land with the cheapest guy and then they call us back 6 months later and they're like, this is awful. I got to get out of here. I got to go. I got to move now. And they get into one of these fire drills just like that. I mean, it's wild what people will get themselves into. And then they'll get into contracts where they have a big operation and they'll sign a 3-month, 90-day rolling contract or something. Like, I mean, if you got really cheap pricing on 90-day contract, you are in for a world of hurt because as soon as that 3PL lands a, a bigger, more profitable customer, boop, you got to go. And if you have a big enough account, like you're up a creek, right? You got to move an operation like that.
it's so disruptive. And that's why making a decision in our industry is never a snap decision. That's why people go through these bid processes and they struggle with it. Stealing, pulling a piece, not stealing, but pulling a piece of business away from even a failing 3PL is hard because of the cost of the unknown, the cost of the move, the service disruption. It took this company basically having their doors almost shut down for them to realize that it was time to move.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a crazy world out there. The 3PL space is just the things that we've seen from the structure of contracts all the way to, pricing models and everything in between. I mean, it's wild what some people get themselves into, especially with the size of operations some of them are, and you're like, "How in the world are they getting by with 90-day rolling contracts?" That's just crazy to me. And then as a 3PL, you're like, they're taking up 100,000 square feet on a 90-day contract?
It's actually not good for either party,
No, it's not.
because as a 3PL, I don't like having that much space tied up without knowing what's gonna happen tomorrow, and, on the flip side, what you just said, the customer could be booted out at any time if they don't the 3PL gets a better deal.
How do you feel about liens on product? Like, if you're gonna take on a huge piece of business, are you demanding that your first lien on their product, obviously, you have it all, or are you okay taking a back seat to, say, a bank that they've leveraged some debt on? Or how do you typically handle those conversations?
More often than not, I keep my lien. Um,
First lien.
the first lien. I mean, you know, I think that I'm pretty sure the expression "possession is 9/10 of the law" might have come from the warehousing business.
Yeah.
We've got possession of your product. There's also statutory laws that in most states that give us that right, whether it's in an agreement or not. So, you may not have it in your agreement, but you might have statutory law on your side. So it's just something that's developed within the structure of the law for thousands of years. I don't know, maybe not thousands. I think thousands of years
Yeah,
actually, from the very
probably.
early days of grain storage, those sort of concepts came together. So, we've got your product. All we want is to get paid. We're not asking for anything. We're not asking to do anything special. Just pay us and then take your stuff if you need to move and move out. So I tend to not do that. I maybe a few times over my career have I taken a backseat to a bank, but in that case, it's usually well structured. There's some kind of letter that says, "Look, we're gonna do this or do that. We're gonna pay you, whatever. But you are taking a backseat, but we're gonna pay you in some way." But it's just not optimal, especially if you have it, and that's the way that
Yeah.
most companies go.
Well, I've seen like, I just recently went through this where a brand that I helped find a 3PL lands with a great operator, they're doing a great job, but it that's expensive, and these guys are going, "Man, we need to place larger purchase orders. We've gotta go take on some debt, and the only way the bank is gonna allow us to do that is if they get first lien on all of our product so that we can place because we're selling a lot, but we just don't have the cash right now." They approach the 3PL and say, "Hey, will you sign this document that gives you second lien, bank first lien?" The 3PL is like, "Man, I can't do that."
Well, and I subordinate myself now, right?
Well, but
Yeah.
then the brand's rebuttal is like, "Hey, man, we're times are tough for us. We're trying to stay in business and keep rolling. I need you to help me. I need you to be a partner in this regard." But the 3PL is like, "Man, that opens me up to a lot." That same 3PL has already dealt with taking a back seat.
They got burned.
Company went out of business, and for 18 months, they've had 500 pallets in their building. They're not getting paid $1 on because the bank owns it, and the bank's not paying them. The brand's not paying them, and they're just taking up space, and they can't liquidate it because they don't have control of it. So they're just sitting on pallet positions going, what do I do?
Right.
So
That's the reason for not wanting to do it.
exactly.
But, listen, every now and then you take a chance too, and you do that. Apparently they did it, right? Probably that one time, and they got
Right.
burned. So,
and that, yeah. But it's interesting because I'm always curious how, other 3PLs are thinking about these things, and like what would a consultant say when you're asking, like if I was the 3PL asking you this question, obviously you're gonna give them some of those similar examples, going, man, I don't know,
some of the newer 3PLs that I deal with that are really didn't grow up in the industry don't even know that they have that right, and that they don't even have agreements with it in it. Not every 3PL has that in their agreement. I think if if you're using like the standard IWLA draft agreement, that like the language is like 90% the same in every 3PL I see, it's covered. Yeah, but then some 3PLs just sort of have these business type of agreements that they put together with an attorney who knows nothing about warehouse law, and it's not even in them. And I come across those guys, and I'm like, "Do you understand that you could have this?" And what is this? Tell me more. Crazy.
It's wild, man. It's a crazy business that we fell into.
You fell into it.
Yeah. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
It's an absolute pleasure to have the Vinnie G, Vincent Gulisano, on the 3PL Insider podcast. If you are having any questions about like what should I do, this is the guy to call. You call Vinnie G, and he will help you figure it out.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for coming on, man.